Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the epic 64-year journey of modern India's Panchvarshia Yojana, the 5-year plans. Imagine it's the 1950s. You've got a newly independent nation stepping onto the global stage, trying to find its footing, feed its people, and literally build an industrial base from scratch. This isn't just some dry timeline of economic policies. It's the fascinating story of how a massive country strategized its own survival and eventual rise. Understanding these historical pivots is absolutely crucial because the architecture of these early plans built the very foundation of the global economic powerhouse we see today. Let's dive in. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Foundations of a nation. 2. Crises and plan holidays. 3. Poverty and political shifts. 4. The pre-liberalization era. 5. The 1991 turning point. And finally, 6. The final modern plans.
Section 1. Foundations of a Nation, the ambitious building years. Starting right out of the gate in 1951 under Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, the primary goal was about as basic and critical as it gets, just feed the country and lay down the absolute bedrock of a nation. Plan 1 kicked off, smoothly followed by Plan 2 in 1956, which then wrapped up in 61. These first two plans really set the tone. They established a rigorous cycle of ambitious, foundational building for decades to come. But look at the dramatic contrast between these first two strategies. Plan 1 leaned on the Herod-Dahmer model, focusing entirely on agriculture and rural development. And honestly, it worked beautifully. India actually crushed its growth target, hitting 3.6% against a pretty modest 2.1% goal. But then, for Plan 2, they made a massive pivot using the P.C. Mahalanobis model. The government realized that to truly grow, they couldn't just rely on farms forever. They needed basic and heavy industries. In short, they needed steel. And you can still see the physical legacy of those shifting strategies today. When they focused on agriculture, they built these massive irrigation projects, the Bakra Nangal, Hirakud, and Nagarjuna Sagar dams. When they realized they needed top-tier engineering talent, they laid the foundation for 5 IITs, starting with Kharagpur in 51. And when that heavy industry pivot happened in Plan 2, they threw up the colossal Rourkela, Durgapur, and Bhilai steel plants. These monumental institutions were no accident. They were the direct result of intense, centralized planning.
Section 2. Crises and plan holidays, devastating setbacks and resilience.
So all that optimism and momentum from the early 50s, it hit some massive, absolutely devastating roadblocks in the 1960s. The decade started normally enough with Plan 3 in 61, but by 1966, the traditional 5-year cycle was completely broken. They were forced into a 3-year pause before the next official plan could even begin. Let's look at exactly why things went off the rails. The third plan was based on the self-reliant goals of the Gadgil formula, aiming for a 5.6% growth rate. But as you can see, they only hit 2.8%, literally half of what was expected. Why? Well, causality is key here. India was hit with a war with China in 62, another war with Pakistan in 65, and on top of that, back-to-back severe droughts. It was a crushing blow to the economy that made projecting out 5 years completely impossible. So what do you do when everything falls apart? You take a plan holiday, or Yojana Avkash. Now, to be clear, this wasn't a vacation. It was a desperate, strategic 3-year break that acted as an economic shock absorber. Facing the catastrophic failure of the third plan and the very real threat of mass starvation, the government shifted all its focus towards securing food stability. This specific pause is actually what gave birth to the crucial Green Revolution, pushing high-yielding variety seeds into states like Punjab and Haryana just to save the nation's food supply. Section 3. Poverty and political shifts. Struggles, slogans, and sanctions. Moving into the 1970s, intense political maneuvering under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and a desperate need to tackle systemic poverty really fragmented the timeline. Plan 4 starts in 69, Plan 5 in 74, but then by 1978, the 5-year structure gets interrupted again by something called a rolling plan, which lasts until 1980. The political winds were shifting fast, and economic strategies were getting yanked right along with them. Actually, here's a crazy piece of trivia for you. The 5th 5-year plan is the only one in Indian history to last exactly 4 years. It never even reached its expiration date. The reason for that 4-year lifespan was the rolling plan. When the new Janata Party government came into power, they dissolved the fifth plan a year early to try this new strategy, where plans are evaluated and rolled over annually instead of being locked in for 5 years. But despite the political tug of war, this era spanning the fourth and fifth plans gave us some massive historical milestones. We're talking the nationalization of 14 major banks, the iconic Garibi Hatao, or Remove Poverty slogan, and Operation Smiling Buddha, which was India's very first underground nuclear test. Section 4, the pre-liberalization era, modernization and social justice. All right, as we move into the 1980s, political stability largely returned, but a subtle economic crisis was dangerously brewing right beneath the surface. The sixth plan begins in 1980, and the seventh plan runs from 85 to 90 under the leadership of Indira Gandhi and leader Rajiv Gandhi. The overarching themes here were technological modernization and a really deep push for social justice. There's a crucial concept from this era, and it's a super frequent term if you follow economics, called the Hindu rate of growth. Coined by Professor Raj Krishna, it described this frustratingly sluggish, stagnant economic growth rate of just 3 to 5% that had plagued India for decades leading up to the 80s. To desperately break out of this slow growth cycle, the sixth and seventh plans aggressively rolled out rural employment schemes. Programs like TriSam for rural youth and the Jawahar Rozgar Yojana were all about trying to inject productivity directly into the grassroots level. Section 5, the 1991 turning point, crisis, bailouts, and boom. And that brings us to literally the most dramatic pivot in modern Indian economic history. Political instability combined with practically empty foreign exchange reserves, it got so bad India couldn't even pay for 2 weeks of imports, forced yet another pause. We see annual plans running from 1990 to 92 before the highly transformative eighth plan could finally be launched. Talk about a comeback. Because of that desperate financial situation, India had to secure an IMF bailout. And the conditions of that bailout pushed Finance Minister Manmohan Singh to introduce sweeping LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. The result? Under Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao, they targeted 5.6% growth and achieved a massive 6.8%. It was highly successful. They finally definitively shattered that old, sluggish Hindu rate of growth. Section 6, the final modern plans. The push for inclusive sustainability. Entering the 21st century, we see how the nation's goals evolved dramatically from basic agricultural survival to striving for true global competitiveness. Tracking this final chronological arc, Plan 10 kicks off in 2002, Plan 11 in 2007, which notably had to navigate overlapping with the massive 2008 global financial crisis, and Plan 12 begins in 2012. But notice how the timeline abruptly stops in 2014. Before we get to that ending, look at how the buzzwords evolve across the Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh eras. Plan 10 heavily focused on social metrics, like reducing gender gaps and illiteracy. Plan 11 upgraded the goal to faster and more inclusive growth. And by Plan 12, they added a vital new keyword to the mix: sustainable. The ambition was no longer just about growing fast, it was about growing equitably and ensuring the environment and resources could actually support that growth long-term. And then, the 64-year shebang comes to a historic conclusion. In 2014, the newly elected Modi government made the decision to dissolve the Planning Commission entirely. The rigid, 5-year centralized model was retired and replaced by Niti Aayog, a new think tank model designed to foster cooperative federalism and bottom-up policymaking, rather than those old top-down 5-year dictates. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. Look at the incredible, turbulent, yet upward trajectory of those 64 years. In a rapidly changing, highly globalized modern economy, are rigid multi-year plans fundamentally obsolete? Or, when a developing nation is desperately trying to build its absolute foundation, is a long-term, centralized vision exactly what it needs to survive? Think about how those early steel plants and dams shaped the India of today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the 5-year plans, and keep questioning how the architectures of the past build the economies of our future.